know the dogma.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we're discussing Loki Season 2, Episode 6, Glorious Purpose. This episode was a marvel, bringing us back to the Season 1 finale with a grand realization that it was never out of He Who Remains' control, and someone must always sit upon the throne. Someone must make the hard choice when indecision insists upon itself. We got our answer. Utilitarian happiness, even if it means that someone must decide who lives and who dies. But let's not jump ahead of ourselves, because until I finish this video, Season 2 of Loki is not over, and we can be immersed in storytelling and theory crafting about the man burdened with glorious purpose. Loki. The episode begins with Loki behind OB and Victor timely running out to his demise. We see this little body time slip to show that he's not time slipping as a third-party spectator like we've seen previously, but into his old body. This really does confirm that he could have gone to any point in the MCU previously and interacted in a really interesting way. The studio could have won some points by having one of those montage moments be like him, I don't know, pleading with Tony Stark back in 2012 that, hey, like time travel's real and hey, I'm desperate. The world is ending. Listen to me, and then Thor just slaps the mouth guard on him again. But, alas, money. It was grand. Don't get me wrong. But the scope of what they were allowed to do kind of felt obvious. And I think it's one of the big constraints for the TV shows that Marvel has been trying to perfect for the last few years. Despite their best intentions, they don't feel connected to the MCU. Maybe in a way that they should, or maybe not for everybody, or maybe I'm just wrong. But the blunt force reminder that they are connected and that Robert Downey Jr. is once again being discussed rejoining the MCU, God, it would have shaken the internet. And I would have loved to have seen that, but I digress. The largest part of this episode was Loki learning this machine and replaying events to see how they could have done more efficiently. This starts with the same event, slightly rushed, and then the conversation with OB that just says that they took too long. And this is all he needs to start ramping things up. He has a target and he starts insisting upon it. The montage starts again, each time slightly more efficient. They do this montage in a bunch of montages this episode pretty much perfectly, because it's a great pace without feeling like we know their trials promise positive results. It's a training montage, and it does a good job of making the little deviations from how things happened previously into funny moments. Him walking in on Miss Minutes grilling Victor about how, he's not he who remains enough, and they just stare at Loki like, what just happened, right? It's subtle, it's funny, it's charming, and it keeps the pace moving as they cut to them being rushed to another death and another failure. I didn't catch this on my first watch, but some of these times, he doesn't have a helmet. We hear him yelling the first time he drops the multiplier. We see a dozen issues that inform Loki later on when he's finally able to direct, the successful mission, quote unquote. The montage stops when Loki introduces Victor to OB very quickly, and despite the confusion of everybody, Loki stays on track. OB is still self-conscious about his model, and Loki even takes a shot, a little friendship jab here at Mobius when describing the action figure looking like him, when in reality it was going to be Victor.
Says who? Why? Why is it me?
Well, because clearly this isn't me.
This moment also reminded us that this device was a prototype, which previously is how Victor kind of talked his way out of his inventions not working. It creates a further degree of will they, won't they, as we have only one way forward at this point, and even the things that we believe work, like the multiplier, are just as untested as the pants that he promised would make people taller.
I want my money back, Timely. These trousers don't work.
I told you, these were a prototype.
It's a great buildup, and we think that we have like an understanding of what now needs to happen, and then we get the bomb that it would take decades or even centuries for Loki to know what he knows. We see a moment of pondering as we wonder if they are brave enough to do this, and then this little text flips around, still keeping us wondering what it's going to say, and then we have it. Loki, for the betterment of an entire multiverse and all of the friends who call it home, spent centuries learning everything he could about mechanics, physics, and engineering, meaning for all intents and purposes, Loki is an IT man now. We come to Loki running the show after an unknowable amount of attempts later, avoiding fully these tiny little mistakes that people have made throughout this process, showing us just how long, just how, like how much frustration has gone into trying to make this single moment work. As Victor suits up, Loki gets an access denied and then an access accepted, bringing the joke about hacking into the system that Mobius said a few episodes ago full circle. And I just really appreciated that moment.
We can hack into the system.
Really? Oh, that is such a relief.
I'm wondering.
What?
I think he meant it as an idea.
So the doors open and the first wave of radiation hits, and I thought, that's it. Yeah, it's done. This is when we acknowledge that it's impossible to do what they're trying to do, but he pushes through. Loki, being a supportive man, gives all the reassurance that he can while Victor's suit rips apart, keeping us waiting for this moment of spaghettification. He loads the multiplier, hits the green button, more tension as it sticks, and then finally goes zooming off. A little hopeful missile heading for the loom. Loki panicking to come back makes us worry that he may not make it, because we are in this position of we've done this a few times and this may not be the first time, but this moment where even Loki seems concerned kind of regrounds us and goes, this is the current. This is something that Loki does not have control over. We are seeing the attempt, and that is great. Victor does finally make it, and as the doors close behind him, a sigh of relief that maybe, hey, it's going to work. Victor rejoices with pumpkins, which was once a term that meant awesome or exciting, and the crew kind of watches with bated breath as the loom expands.
Oh, yes, it worked. It's working right now.
Of course it fails. Because, of course, it fails. It takes Victor saying it this episode, but we've known for a handful of reviews now exactly why. They are trying to expand a system responsible for trimming away an infinite number of infinitely expanding timelines into a single timeline that He Who Remains believed was best for all that remained unpruned. It would need to account for an infinity, or we'd still be deciding which needed to be pruned to maintain a safe operating status. I mean, the name loom points to this, right? It's taking threads and turning them into a pattern that you desire, the weave of time that you make, instead of letting the threads just exist. And honestly, that's a really cool point now that we know how this episode ends and the threads that are, still being controlled, but maybe in a much looser way. It's obviously a system of control, right? The loom is obviously a system of control. And it's why I talked before about the loom needing to be destroyed if we were after that 100% free will. When they announced it was a scaling problem, I was kind of relieved because we talked about this. We've been knowing this was an issue. And it feels good when sci-fi has that degree of realism that you can engage with logically. To some degree, it felt like they were not writing for the people who would engage to this depth, because to me, it felt like all of this was pretty known information, and it just made the reveals feel less revealing. But honestly, I'm not complaining. Truthfully, I'm really not complaining about this point. The system of control was a system of control. For the loom to exist, it would need to account for infinity. To me, these weren't big pinnacle moments, but it affirmed what was already inferred, and we could move on with that original discussion, which ultimately was what the showrunners wanted to continue exploring. 100% free will and all of the bad that comes with it, or a system that one person sat on top of and ultimately decided right and wrong for all of space and time, and we constantly question if they are doing what is best or not. And Loki will still be faced with that regardless. Anyone that's outside of this equation, anyone that's not giving Loki the benefit of the doubt, is going to look at Loki in the same way that we looked at He Who Remains. So maybe these moments did just need to enforce that already known information, making the point a little more clear, to those that weren't so closely considering the morality of the situation, without adding more confusion or a big twist, as we are ultimately, we're just going back to the first question. Which do we do? The point of all of this entire season and search for truth was really just to prove to us that Loki has done everything in his power to explore this choice. He was going into the conversation later defeated. In this moment, we are just defeated, making us believe that this route was impossible and priming us for the fact that He Who Remains was just right. At the end of the day, he was just right, and for that, I credit the writers greatly. After realizing that the plan failed, it's still apparent that they could start bombing the branches like Dox was doing and be in a much better position. It's doing what they don't want to do, surely. Nobody wants to do that, but it's either that or death. and this was never really brought back up. I feel like the writers did miss an opportunity here to bring this up and add just another layer of decision-making if they would choose their own lives over the timelines that are now spiraling out of control, that are now, threatening even them in the sacred timeline. If they really believe that this was the end of everything, why not just start shooting timelines, Sylvie makes the breakthrough that it was all back to that first choice that she made to kill He Who Remains, and we are taken directly there now that Loki knows this is where he needs to interact. So we return. Loki pleaded his case to the best of his abilities to prove to Sylvie that she must not take his life, trying to make her see the world that he sees, but failing because she was just too filled with rage and disdain for the system, the powers that be. She wanted revolution, but was too blind to see that 100% free will really isn't what anybody is after. She doesn't want a system where people can murder each other when it pleases them. She wants a system where we can be free and happy and not feel like a victim of something. She probably wishes that for everybody and just doesn't really know how to do that. She just doesn't realize that 100% free will, 100% freedom for timelines to exist as they please, will lead to death and destruction for all. If there is one thing we no longer need to speculate about, it's this position. Like, government is better than no government, and Disney is doing its best to brainwash us into not overthrowing the government. So download your copy of The Anarchist Cook. That last part was redacted by YouTube in correlation with Disney and its marketing department, the US government. I, Hax Dogma, of sound mind and sound body, fully support the efforts of Disney and the US government. Praise be to Mickey Mouse and other fictional characters like George Washington. May freedom ring, but not too much. Amen. The idea of killing Sylvie starts here, and as the scene goes on, it really feels like it's going in that direction. It's the only way. The montage of him trying starts again and kind of proving that she does whoop his ass every single time. Yeah. But during this montage, this scene right here is my favorite. It hints at him knowing about the time slipping earlier, because we know that he scripted all of this to a certain point. Loki deviates from that script after he time slipped, and he kind of turns around going like, oh, I guess it's already happening. He laughs when Loki defends him because he's mocking Sylvie. Like, see, I don't even have to defend myself. This is how powerful I am. It is glorious. I loved this tiny little interaction. After a countless number of attempts, he asks why he never tries to fight back, and He Who Remains has all the confirmation he needs to know that Loki is already on that journey. I loved this conversation. It has such great energy, just like the season 1 finale. He brings up pausing time, and it sets a certain tone that Loki is still very much learning in this moment. And it sets it up for, He Who Remains to believe that, but also us to believe that. And it is great. It makes it to where when he pauses time and takes control of the conversation later on, it just feels so good. I love the tone of He Who Remains and just how condescending, how powerful it feels. Like, this is a man who is just so in control that nothing phases him. He's not insecure about anything. He is just living in this moment. He is a well thought out individual. He has planned so much of his life, and there is no doubt that he is going to be on top no matter what they attempt. And it is a great, the tone is set so well so that later on when Loki brings up the idea of breaking the system, breaking the loom, He Who Remains loses that smile a little bit. It's like, oh, but that would cause a brutal war, and that's the first time that we really see He Who Remains not as master of his domain. And yeah, Majors is such a great actor for this role. He's goofy, but also so strong. Him saying reincarnation, baby, it just makes me so happy. I love it. I love it every single time he does it. And also there's a couple other moments in these monologues that they're such good moments. Also, him as Victor Timely, him mocking Victor Timely. Man, it was so good. He did so good this season. And then we get the moment where Loki takes control, realizing that he has gone through this a few thousand times as well. He is leveling up, and in a major way, and I love it for him. They talk about the scaling problem and that it was exploding as a failsafe and not as actually a bad thing. It was meant to explode because it's coded to reduce all but the sacred timeline to nothing. This was a good reveal because previously it was, made to appear as the loom exploding was the loom being destroyed. and everything that came with that, but of course that is not the case. After some posturing on both sides, we get back to square one with nowhere to go, free will or oppression. And then Loki realizes that he could change the equation. There is a third option. He could break the loom and do the job himself, knowing what is right and what is wrong after all of this time, and what would ultimately best serve utilitarian happiness. It's funny because it's basically the thing that He Who Remains was offering him and Sylvie in season 1. You know, he's like, yeah, guys, it's lonely. I'm tired. I'm old. I'm chill if y'all just want to take over. And then they killed him and did the same thing anyway. You know, like that's a pretty fair assessment. And you may even hear that as a criticism of the season. But the point of the season, again, was to show us the outcome of the wrong choice. Killing him and unleashing the timelines isn't going to work because of what we've seen. And taking over his mantle isn't going to work because, well, the system is just bad. We can't trust that the sacred timeline is being inclusive as it could be, is being as fair and just as it should be. So him creating a new system where he is literally burdened with glorious purpose of making the hard decisions while also allowing the actual TVA to exist and weigh in and judge right and wrong for that utilitarian choice, like, that's why all of this needed to happen. Loki in season 1 just was not ready for this. Now he's a Giga Chad, inclusive, respectful, loved, and able to make the hard decisions when it comes time to decide the trolley problem of one timeline dying or all of them dying. This season was fucking phenomenal. Even if the big twist wasn't that Obi was the villain this entire time, or a He Who Remains variant that just showed up after He Who Remains was like, hey, I'll see you soon. It was a great setup. And ultimately, they didn't go in that direction. It doesn't mean that Obi has to just be left. There's a lot of ways that Obi can continue in the story, in the overall MCU. I think it would be beneficial to do it. We need characters like this. We need actors, specifically, like this, in the MCU if we want to care about this thing again. Like if we want to care about Marvel in the same way that we did about Avengers and Endgame, and when Iron Man was like coming out of the cave for the first time. Imagine if Obi is Doctor Doom in an alternate reality. Imagine if Fantastic Four have to stop this fucking actor. Like, God, it would be wonderful. But let's see what happens. Coming back to the episode, we have this little monologue.
Every moment of peace you've ever experienced was yours.
Because I was here, alone, at the end of time.
This needs to be repeated by Loki at some point. Like, they are putting Loki in such a great position to be this gray area villain, protagonist, antagonist, like thing. Like in 30 years, if whatever Marvel superstar is wanting to rebel against the powers that be and realizes the system is literally being controlled by someone's or a group's perceived greater good, it would be wonderful to see this moment repeated. Loki would be one of the best villains ever because we know what he's gone through and we'll always be able to engage in these two camps of thought. Like it's either free will or control. It's either order or chaos. And seeing Loki trying to humble the mighty hero that thinks they understand what they're fighting against, just like He Who Remains is doing, God, that would be so awesome. So He Who Remains, or HWR, tries to make him see once again that there are only two paths, and Loki declares that he will find another way.
And around and around and around we go.
Loki then goes on a little mission to get perspective and kind of permission from the people that he's also a part of. So it doesn't feel like it's just, him making this decision, right? He is getting the perspective of his friends in these moments. And I think there's so much power there. Learning from Mobius in this scene that you must sacrifice the few to save the many, that sometimes you have to make the hard choices even when it feels really, really bad to do so. We learn more about his relationship with Renslayer, and the moment finishes with a nice handshake between two men sharing their thoughts with each other about right and wrong. There is no comfort in killing, but if killing stops more killing, you must kill. Now, something important that I think Loki also takes away here is that it's really not just about him making that choice. Like, you can't just eye for an eye at the entire time. It's about the system. Like, we learn later on that a diverse group of people in the war room is ultimately deciding. They are doing what they should have been doing under He Who Remains, but he didn't want to risk the system that already worked. He kept what he knew, and that was being alone. And I think one thing we can count on is more timelines existing in this system and only pruning when absolutely necessary. When the council agrees, when the timekeepers, assuming they keep that name, agree, and when the threat is actually a threat and not when it's a child that was born a girl instead of a boy. Like we talked about before, it's about diverse perspectives to find what's best for everybody, not just one person at the end of time deciding who lives and who dies. Now, Loki is ultimately in that position, but the TVA is alive and active at the end of the episode, so we know that he's allowing them to control as much as they can, while probably only intervening when he needs to. In fact, him breaking all of the timelines and the loom was probably him killing some timelines as well. Something to buy himself and the TVA time to actually get a system of control in place, which is just more evidence that Dox really did nothing wrong. But man, let me get back to it. We see Mobius slip away, and then the previous scene at Obi's lair. This time, he pauses time and basically has the same conversation with Sylvie, asking how to proceed with all of the information that he has in this moment. Basically, asking for her consent to kill her, which is still being heavily implied as a way forward at this point. It was a touching goodbye, and I fully believed that he was about to go back and save He Who Remains. But then they start talking about replacing the system of oppression instead of just letting it oppress. And Loki zips out, letting this version of Sylvie die yet again. He comes back to the loom exploding, and it's amazing that it happens here because this is the current version of all of them. Like, our perspective is that this is the most them that they could exist as. Like, if he came back and replaced He Who Remains at the end of season 1, all of the development through season 2 would have made these characters much harder to track, like what happened in the timeline or not. So I'm glad that he chose to do this now. He opens the blast door with magic and walks down the gangway with nothing but pure hope in his heart. It's not made clear why he wasn't immediately turned into an Italian dish, but I believe it has something to do with his magic, right? Like, I'm not sure what else it could be. But he fights through the harsh environment, walking through hell like our collective grandparents had to do both ways to school each morning. This transition was spectacular, showing us how much of a god he intends to be. He breaks apart the loom, darkening all of the branches into a void where creepy things certainly exist. It was spooky and a bit unsettling until he starts bringing together the branches and silently says goodbye. He walks into the end of time, bringing the threads with him, creating Yggdrasil on the ruins of the citadel at the end of time. He turns the throne gold, takes his seat, and brings forth the Norse legend that would make his father, Odin, so very proud. It's amazing that this was the route that we took, and knowing that Loki is sitting here controlling the fates, making sure the threat of complete demise is being managed, is such a great development for his character. I love Loki so very much. At the TVA, we see this new stance of growing together, and the sacred timeline is now a tree of inclusion, including as many timelines as possible, and judging the ones that we talked about before. Mobius talks about the variants of He Who Remains that they keep track of, and allowing others to step in when they aren't specifically needed. The He Who Remains variant is the one from Ant-Man, and it seems like them knowing about the existence of the TVA is a big benchmark that they look for. Hopefully it's a discussion with that variant and, not just them pruning and deleting outright like they were in the past. Something like, hey, you can keep being crazy, but you're going to lose your entire reality, your entire timeline if you keep acting up. Like, it's a pretty good way to deter people from being evil or, self-righteous or just dummies. I'm picturing an education program that walks them through like Loki was in season 1, and it's Miss Minutes going, all right, so you found yourself at the TVA. I'm sure you're wondering what comes next. They talk about taking down the pictures of the old timekeepers, and it's a little funny. Like, the stance here is wanting to make sure that they remember their history to avoid repeating it, which is sound, which is facts, which is something that we should all do. But if this episode aired like 5 years ago, so many people would be talking about like the commotion of removing old statues to stop glorifying villainy, in the United States at least. I don't know if people outside of this country actually know that. Like, that was a big point of contention. Like, do we take down these old Confederate statues or not? And here it's presented with such a neutral tone that it doesn't feel politically motivated at all. This is the same conversation, but nobody is going to bring that up. And to me, It makes politics seem so funny. Like, I don't really feel like most people care about politics. It really just feels like we're picking teams, but I don't know. That's another video. Mobius decides to quit the TVA, and man, I understand it, but I'm going to miss him in the MCU. I hope he comes back and represents the little man just doing the best that he can, or honestly, imagine if like a variant of him is just Owen Wilson and he comes back as Owen Wilson. That shit would be so fucking funny. The War Room is filled with perspective, a glorious truth that coming together with different backgrounds can help us find, or at least approximate, an objective truth in the world. The life here feels good, and even this man who is asleep is already engaged and ready to actually do something. His job is not just repeating the guilty verdict that he was told to say over and over again, but able to consider and trial and actually judge if they or anybody should be pruned or not. We also see the younger He Who Remains not getting this book, ending the cycle completely. It would be cool to see this come back in the future, though, like maybe a variant could recruit this person and go, look at what Loki, look at what this person, this organization, this oppressive thing, look at what they have taken from you. This was your throne at the end of time, and he allowed you to die because he thought he could do it better. I think that would be just such a great villain story. We also see Renslayer, who is faced with Alioth, and it's made to look like she's about to die, though she seems pretty confident, or maybe she's just accepting. I'm really not too sure. Like, she's sitting among the rubble and the previous TVA sign. But let's not forget, He Who Remains won the war by taming Alioth, and Renslayer was the general in his army. If she has a trick up her sleeve, if she pulls out like a little magic stick and is like, fetch boy, I wouldn't be surprised, but I guess we'll see what they do with this character. Mobius then looks at the life that he's been fighting for so long. It's a touching moment, and he timidly waits to push forward. He parts with Sylvie, and then we come to Loki at the end of time, hearing the note from Mobius about letting time pass. We see the God King himself, waiting, watching, doing the best that he can, a true ruler, a true hero, Loki, Odin's son, a king that would make his mother and father so very proud. And I have no doubt that they looked down at him from Valhalla. But with that, we come to the end of the video. Much love everybody that stayed till the end, including the heavy spoiler man himself that just shouted me out at the end of his last video. I am watching that and playing Minecraft and just randomly hear my name. Man, what a treat. Thank you so very much for that. And thank you for everyone that watched Loki with me this season. It felt so good to have another show to dive into, to each week have a deadline of sorts and make videos and just discuss and theorycraft. I'm gonna do what I always do. And I think that people that know this channel, that have been here for a little bit, I think you know what I'm about to say. I'm gonna promise you more. I'm going to go over the recommendations of everybody that, says I should cover X, Y, and Z. And then I'm going to stress myself out. And then I'm going to take a little break. And I'm trying very hard not to get out of the content creation mindset and to let that little break be too long. But listen, I know who I am. Right now, I just want to appreciate this moment. And right now, I just want to say thank you for being here. And I appreciate you so very much, including all of the commenters that make this community feel like a community. It's really you. Like, I'm only making videos, but it's really you that makes this place special. And for that, I'm grateful. Thank you. Seeing your usernames repeatedly pop up to engage in storytelling, fuck, that is just something special. You enable me to be me, even if we disagree, even if we are wrong about theories, even if I bring my personal life into this. I thrive because of you. And I guess I just want you to know that something small like commenting on a video has real impact on my sacred timeline. So much love, everybody. And I cannot wait to talk to you all again soon.